as possible. But as a free world, and therefore as a free media, we must also set ourselves clear tasks in this situation. Together with showing the world the truth about the barbarism of Russian invaders, we must also make Russia bear the full consequences of all its criminal activities, including paying for the rapid reconstruction of the devastated Ukraine. We must also see to it that all those guilty of war crimes committed before the eyes of the world will be punished. Anyone who had a role in this assault must be held accountable in the International Criminal Court. We also have another duty. It is our duty to burn to the ground all the seeds of Putinism, which over the years have begun to sprout up in our democratic system. One of the most important areas for the deputinization of Europe and the whole democratic world is to ensure that every citizen has the access to the truth. And even the smallest manifestation of the partisanship of the media, the silencing of public debate, the harassment of journalists, and the use of public resources for government or party propaganda must be stopped with all the democratic force. If we cannot stop the attack on free media, sooner or later we will have to stop the rocket and bomb attacks. It is high time that this well-known truth was applied consistently in our everyday life. Bombs kill people and demolish houses. Propaganda kills humanity and destroys democracy. The power of propaganda is enormous. The mother of a Russian soldier captured in Ukraine, who still prefers to believe Putin's television rather than the weeping voice of her son, is a symbol of this. The strength of democracy and freedom lies in the truth, as the Ukrainians have heroically demonstrated. We must not waste this lesson. In the name of respect for the Ukrainian heroes, and in the name of respect for thousands of victims of this bestial invasion, I call on all of us to defend the truth, the free media and independent journalists, because this is a defense of peace and defense of the lives of innocent people. Slava Ukraini!
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is good to be back for real, despite the war which is raging in our neighboring country, Ukraine. I propose that we take 1 minute of meditation and reflection to honor the victims of this atrocious war. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, dear organizers, European Federation of Journalists, the city of Gdansk, the Pomorsky region, and this wonderful museum, which was awarded the European Museum Prize. My dear friends, 24th of February was a sad day for Europe, for Ukraine, for the world. The launch of a special military intervention on Ukrainian soil. For the unwarned public, it could have sounded like a brief aesthetic surgery, after which we would leave the hospital before anyone notices. But Europe noticed, the world noticed. The following day, on 25th of February, the Russian Federation was suspended from the Council of Europe in an unprecedented rapid decision by its Committee of Ministers. 2 days ago, on a warm spring day in Strasbourg, the flag of the Russian Federation was taken down from the parvis of the Palace of Europe, after a unanimous opinion of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and a unanimous decision of the 46 remaining states of the organization. I call it the Mariupol Resolution. Yesterday, while we were debating, the Committee of Ministers also decided to suspend all relations with Belarus as a result of the country's active participation in the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. The result of all of this is that Russian citizens will, after a transition period, no longer have access to the protection offered by the European Convention of Human Rights, as being a party to the Convention is pledged to Russia's membership of the organization. I can tell you that this reflection took a prominent place in the debates and that strong voices were raised to continue cooperation with voices which are independent from the Putin regime. Those anti-war Russians who were called this morning even scums and traitors by the Russian president. Dear friends, some 2 years ago, we faced a major global health crisis, one resulting in massive human, economic, social costs. The media sector, your sector, was hit particularly hard, and many journalists lost their jobs. And yet, it would have been hard to imagine then, as it is now, that only 2 years later, we would be facing another unprecedented crisis, with one Council of Europe member state deciding to wage war on another. Some of us ask, when did it go wrong? Why did it go wrong? As our Russian colleague reminded us yesterday, there is not one single event, but a series of insidious events that surreptitiously led to this final act. The Russian aggression in Ukraine is a flagrant violation of everything our organization stands for. The tragedy also once again underscores the crucial role of the media. In particular, in times of war, media becomes part of warfare. We discussed yesterday the difference between journalism and propaganda, and some believe that during war we should be playing with different rules. I would be cautious about this, and I will give you a few examples later on. We see the formidable effort of many Ukrainian and other media to deliver reliable information to the public, information that can help protect civilians against existing threats, information that attests to the grim reality of war, information that brings this war to the attention of the international community. We see the equally powerful, albeit much more sinister efforts of the Russian state to subdue the domestic media and enforce on them the official narrative. This includes restricting permissible sources, shutting down independent media outlets, and even prohibiting the use of the terms of war and peace. I wonder if brandishing Tolstoy, Vojna i mir, has become a criminal offense. These actions, along with further criminalization of so-called false information and blocking of social media, have deprived people in Russia of credible, unbiased information. The crackdown on dissenting voices seems complete. Also, Ukraine has introduced new content restrictions for the print and broadcast media, prohibiting denial of the armed aggression of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. The Ukrainian National Council of Television and Radio Broadcasting suspended the retransmission of more than 70 Russian TV channels, and several other countries followed suit. Finally, one of the European Union's measures taken in response to the Russian aggression consisted of banning the state-owned channels Russia Today and Sputnik, a sanction described yesterday by Vice President Jourova as responding to a security risk, but also one that is temporary and can be repealed once no longer necessary. May I remind you that the European Court of Human Rights has always implored that restrictions on freedom of expression should be lawful, restricted in time, and necessary in a democratic society. Public discourse in wartime has raised a number of questions, also among online platforms, especially social media platforms, where the information war is being fought. Meta, for example, somewhat relaxed its policy on hate speech to allow expression of self-defiance and self-defense reacting to the invasion of Ukraine. The policy only applies to Ukraine and is to provide to the Ukrainians a channel to express their fury and resistance at the invading forces. Although initially there were worrying reports that direct incitement to violence would also be allowed, Meta is now saying it will not tolerate Russophobia, harassment, or calls for violence against the Russians on their platform. I find it nevertheless particularly worrying that once again a private company is determining an incredibly sensitive issue which should be assessed by an independent oversight body and preferably by courts. The complexities surrounding this, or indeed any war, are impossible to sketch in this sole address, nor is that my intention. Only with time will we be able to assess the magnitude of its consequences, including the consequences of the information war fought largely in the digital battle space, which, and what is without doubt, is the free media and politics are being challenged. And while we contemplate, consolidate, and collaborate to retain free European media and help Ukrainian journalists pre-existing problems, those affecting media independence and viability, those impoverishing diversity, and those compromising journalist safety or indeed our trust in information persist. Persist and call for urgent responses. The debate yesterday on the Polish media situation was particularly revealing in this regard. For example, another worrying development here in Poland is unfortunately that on the 10th of March, the Polish Constitutional Court delivered the new judgment against declaring Article 6, Paragraph 1 of the Convention on Human Rights incompatible with the Polish Constitution, and giving new reasons for this. That is why yesterday our Secretary General sent a second letter to the minister requesting that the Polish government provide additional explanations. Let's not put everything on the shoulders of the war. In these troubled times, it is vital that we rise to the challenge of our shared collective responsibility for implementing the Convention. I sincerely hope that the dialogue with the Polish authorities will enable us to move forward in the right direction. After this long introduction, dear friends, I will focus on three issues which I think require our continued focus and attention. And more than anything, political will at the highest levels. Only political engagement can lead to proper support structures and response mechanisms. Political will. We often state that freedom of expression is a cornerstone of our democratic societies. It's a mantra, we repeat it. But I also see that freedom of expression requires a democratic society in which to cherish and bloom. The two go together. The issues I wish to address are safety, sustainability, and credibility. Many of those we tackled yesterday. Another important issue is, of course, also literacy, but my colleague in the room, Urška Umek, will speak about that in the first panel today. To start with safety, we know that one of the preconditions for enabling the media to perform its important function of public watchdog is that journalists can express their opinions without fear for their safety. The goal seems further away today than it was ever. A camera operator has been killed along with 4 other people when the Russian military forces shelled the television tower in Kiev. 6 journalists and media workers have been killed since the beginning of this aggression, as many as were reported in the whole year of 2021 on European soil, and the toll is likely to increase. But the downward trend is not new, as evidenced by alerts on the Council of Europe's platform for the safety of journalists. Last year, the platform recorded 282 alerts, an exponential rise to previous years. I cannot stress enough that attacks against journalists, which have intensified in several states during the pandemic, constitute the most serious violations of human rights. Such attacks not only target the concerned individuals, but deprive others of their rights to receive information. They undermine public debate, which is at the heart of our pluralistic democracy. This concern requires serious political attention and coordinated action across Europe and wider. Why am I repeating this? As we know, international standards exist, they have been developed, they have been meticulously crafted and mutually reinforced through instruments of several international organizations. That's not where the item goes wrong. Adeline, I don't see her here. Adeline yesterday informed us of the United Nations Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity. The Council of Europe's recommendation on the protection of journalism and safety of journalists and other media actors is a comprehensive overview of standards, many of which are binding on states by virtue of the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. The European Commission also last year adopted the recommendation on the protection, safety, and empowerment of journalists, which further concrete actions to be taken by member states. This has been largely based and inspired on the work of the Council of Europe and the recommendations of 2016. While international instruments and standards can be influential, regulation and policy implementation are within the domain of the individual countries. And it is at this level that our efforts need to be focused. For our part, the Council of Europe is intensifying the dialogue with the partners of the Platform for the Safety of Journalists, including the European Federation of Journalists, as one of the, if not the most productive partner in producing alerts, aiming for increased political engagement by both the Committee of Ministers, which is our decision-making body, and individual member states. Furthermore, at last year's Conference of Ministers, our member states responsible for media and information society committed to adapt and adopt national action plans for the safety of journalists, targeted to their country's specific situations and risks faced by journalists working there. The third avenue of our work is ensuring better compliance with the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, the organization's supervision mechanism, for the implementation of judgments can produce effective and long-term effects. But it also shows that especially where general measures are needed, such as improving regulatory frameworks, results are slow. The organization's support to overcome this situation includes updating the implementation guide to the recommendation on the safety of journalists, supporting states with more concrete examples of good practices and other useful sources. Secondly, I would like to say a few words on the importance of financially sustainable media environment, one of major challenges for journalism, and especially the production of quality journalism. Traditional advertising-based media business models have been thoroughly disrupted in the past decade. Both traditional and digital publishers are facing severe financial problems, and across the globe, media are increasingly concentrated in the hands of just a few companies. States, as the ultimate guarantors of media pluralism, have an obligation to ensure a diverse media offer. In the current circumstances, this includes support to ensure the financial sustainability of journalism. State support to media is a double-edged sword, as we know. It requires strong safeguards to avoid compromising editorial independence of the beneficiaries and preserving the integrity of journalism. It requires careful consideration of what kind of support can best help improve sustainability. And from a political perspective, it also requires a basic level of trust in the media as a producer of a public good, one that cannot be compensated for the full value of its service on a competitive market, but whose benefits should be enjoyed by all. The economic downturn caused by the outbreak of COVID-19 and the parallel increased demand for accurate and reliable news sources has revealed the urgent needs for support. I would say it has also provided justification for wider systemic changes and regulatory intervention. Indeed, states across Europe provided support packages. However, in many countries, the economic support was limited to lockdown periods, and in others, it created risky financial dependencies and concerns about discriminatory allocation. Again, this cannot be attributed to a lack of implementation standards. The Council of Europe has consistently highlighted in its instruments the importance of transparency, we debated it yesterday, and non-discrimination in media funding. It has called for support schemes in the form of tax cuts, provisions for non-profit journalism, media development measures, or indeed direct subsidies, all of it subject to robust safeguards for the protection of media independence. Just yesterday, also, many things happened while we were here. The Committee of Ministers adopted a recommendation on promoting a favorable environment for quality journalism in the digital age. A set of legal, administrative, and practical guidelines which are aimed at ensuring sustainable funding for quality media, building trust in journalism, and promoting media literacy. We have also discussed yesterday the European Media Freedom Act, the future legislative instrument of the European Union, which is to provide rules helping to fix the broken media markets and support healthy ones. A number of issues that need addressing were mentioned, from transparency to allocation of state resources, support to public service media, and the reinforcement of governance models. It is my hope that the Act will take inspiration from the numerous standards our organization has developed throughout the decades, but also that these issues will finally receive the appropriate attention from the national legislatures in the coming years. Last but not least, allow me to shortly mention the issue of credibility and trust. one that continues to dominate the discussions on media and communication and has only intensified in the past few weeks. In this era of post-truth, and I would say in many respects of post-democracy, when newspeak and disinformation not only threaten the reliability of information, but also present security threats. It is more difficult than ever to find the right balance between free speech and censorship, between engaging counter-narratives and imposing sanctions, between prioritizing individual rights and national security. The sheer volume of false, manipulative content, which includes large-scale campaigns aimed at subverting democratic processes, requires diversified strategies. One is creating conditions to produce quality content and providing people access to authoritative, credible information. As mentioned, this requires a financially stable and sustainable media environment. It also requires an audience which is appreciative of quality journalism and aware of the dangers of disinformation. Furthermore, online platforms, as the largest distributors of content, carry enormous responsibilities to deal with illegal and harmful content. That said, their regulation of content should respect human rights and the rule of law. The Council of Europe continues to provide guidance in this respect through the development of guidelines for countering disinformation through fact-checking and platform design solutions. We also very much welcome the efforts of other organizations, notably the European Union, to create a safe digital space and ensure the integrity of information online. And finally, sanctions can be used against purveyors of disinformation. We should be mindful, though, that legitimate concerns for information integrity do not result in regulation which itself undermines freedom of expression. We have seen such examples during the pandemic. In some states, legislation and practices seeking to prevent disinformation and panic resulted in vaguely framed restrictions, wholesale blocking of websites, non-judicial takedown requests, and broadcast bans. Such extreme restrictions can only be justified in exceptional circumstances, especially when one's right to freedom of expression is used for ends which are contrary to the text and spirit of the European Convention of Human Rights. However, also in such cases, the criteria for restrictions need to be clearly determined in law and accompanied by procedural safeguards. I would add that the pursuit of truth can be somewhat counterproductive if weaponized against particular voices and viewpoints. In this connection, I have full trust in credible, trustworthy media and their relentless journalists, many of whom are right now once again risking their lives to deliver accurate and timely news from the Ukrainian battlegrounds. I offer my heartfelt thanks and admiration to them and conclude by saying that we have taken a number of urgency measures to provide safety and security for journalists in Ukraine and provide tools for effective combating disinformation. We will continue to work with independent journalists and their associations, whether they be in Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and the rest of Europe. We will continue to work with European Federation of Journalists and other platform partners and have foreseen, even though only small, a budget for this cooperation. I thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.
A warm thanks to our keynote speaker for all these thoughts and reflections and demands for all of us. And we are now going to the next session, which is a part of what you are talking about, namely media literacy, media and dialogue for democracy. And this session is moderated by Maja Masiukiewicz from Alliance for Europe. So I would like to welcome Maja Masiukiewicz to moderate the next session, please.
Thank you very much, Magnus. Thank you. I will first would like to welcome our amazing speakers to the stage. Anna Kireva, Barents Press Russia. Ginta Sloga, Director of Baltic Center for Media Excellence. Leif Lonsman, Senior Advisor and Board Member, Nordic Journalist Center. Urška Umek, Secretariat of the Steering Committee of Media and Information. And Elias Karayanis, there's a professor of Science of Technology and Innovation of Entrepreneurship at the George Washington University School of Business, Washington, D.C. He will be with us online, so I hope that he will be here. Please sit. Before I will start, and I will give you a floor because you are our stars today, and we're going to be discussing about something that is crucial and important. I would like to first paint a picture of the story where we are at and why we are talking about this. Today I woke up with the message of my friend saying that Lviv was hit and she saw it from her window. Lviv that I spent already 6 nights during the night. Lviv that is only 60 kilometers away from the European Union border. I have friends that are war journalists and photographers risking their life to show what is happening in Ukraine. Just last week, I founded Alliance for Children Ukraine, that is a foundation that is helping to evacuate children from the orphanages, from the war-hit areas. I have people telling me they are afraid to leave with 50 children because they will be killed. People that are saying that the 2-year-old children are being killed by Russians because they are crying. That is the situation that is happening right now. And it's happening right now. Those people are telling me that they will not be alive for the next 2 weeks if we won't rescue them. And at the same time, we are sitting at the conference and in Brussels and talking, how can we change the policy? And it's making me nervous, you know, just to be fair. I'm working with disinformation for a few years now. And with my expertise, I know that what we need is the strategy communication. And Putin has been spreading disinformation in a very strategic way. He has his society under control. He's spreading disinformation all over Europe and Western world in order to destabilize our society and polarize it. We already are seeing different disinformation narrative coming that will be deploying around the situation of the Ukrainians that are coming as refugees in here. And it's amazing what Poles and the whole Western society did in order to unite and help them. But disinformation will be there. And we need to act right now. I will ask a few questions, and one of them is something that we already discussed yesterday, because we also had a chat and we agreed that we will be talking about the media literacy because it's crucial, but it will be very much focused on the situation right now. And my question is, if we would have seen what is happening already a few years ago, and I mean few years, Putin has been spreading disinformation in Ukraine in 2013. Ukraine is a country that actually was dealing quite well with disinformation, while the Western world wouldn't. We woke up when pandemic started, when we saw something that already has happened. And the behaviors of people, because that's the most important as well with disinformation, is that disinformation is changing the behaviors of people. And if we won't make a stop right now, we will have an issue. And I know how the politics work. I work in politics. But right now, we need to make stand now. We need to make decisions now. And we'll try to think and call for what we can do with the amazing speakers in here. So how we're going to deal with the panel, I will first give the floor to sum up the experience and the problem for each of the panelists. I will also give you a floor to ask questions, so please be prepared. And we'll do some call to action at the very end. So, Anna, if I can first ask you to tell us your experience and the problem.
Well, I expected we would start with this angle, but okay. There is a media war now going on. In this sense, I can say that it's a war, not a media special operation. And there is propaganda working inside and outside, of course. And I think the main problem is that the propaganda or disinformation is highly and voluntarily consumed by the Russian audience. I guess it comes to the Soviet traditional attitude to the media that we don't have this habit to fact check what we heard or what we read. We have this attitude, we believe in what we see and what we read in the media. In the majority, I can't say it's 100% of the Russian population, but the majority of the Russian population tend to believe in the information. Times have changed, and there is a generation of TV and a generation of internet. Regardless to age, it's just the separation who reads what. So the source has changed, but not the attitude. We believe either in what we hear on TV, either in what we read on internet, and everything can be fake, and we are not used to be critical to that. We are not taught this in schools. We are not taught this in the universities. Now I know there are several programs in the universities, but we are not critical to journalism and the media. And another aspect, yesterday I mentioned that on one hand, it's the journalists who are to blame for such an attitude to themselves and to mass media. But also, when we talk to Russian journalists, it's also the problem that the Russian population is not used to pay for quality journalism. They believe it should be free of charge, and they still believe it. And they don't want to understand that if it's not you who has paid for the article you read, it means something has paid for you to find and read this article. We still don't have this understanding inside the society, so these things should be changed. I think that's it for the start, and then we'll continue.
Would you like to maybe add something about what is happening right now in Russia? How is the information flow? Like when you are talking with your friends there, are you able to talk with them?
The main thing is that I disagree with yesterday's speaker that Russia is now in the information darkness. This is not right. We can find, there is access to all the information you can find. Yes, they banned Facebook and Instagram. You switch on VPN and you are there. And you still make posts, I see that. Independent media are banned, but you switch on VPN and you can read Meduza, Dost, whatever. So there is no lack of information. There is a lack of the audience who would want to read this information. It's easier to believe what they are told you on the state-owned media. That's it.
Thank you very much. Is there any approach of the media literacy in Russia? Have you heard anyone was trying at least, or?
Yeah, there are several universities having joint programs with the Nordic universities and Nordic funds to implement the lectures of media literacy. And in a way, this is something we are trying to do in Barents Press when we make all these seminars and press tours and courses for Russian and Nordic journalists. We used to, well, now the borders are closed, we used to bring Russian journalists to Sweden, Norway, Finland, and their journalists to Russia to see how the society works, how the institution works, how people live, to learn this or that issue, to provide less fake news, that journalists learn themselves and they inform their audience about what's going on.
Thank you very much. Ginta, if you could tell.
Yes. We as a center, we are operating in Baltic countries and Eastern neighborhood countries, and we've been doing different kinds of media and information literacy activities for many years. But what was striking me, like for those days here in Gdańsk, and actually it's been something I've been worried actually for a year, I would say, there are so many people who are saying media and information literacy is so important, we should do more, we should really like involve people, audiences, and so on. But when it comes to very practical steps, and when you look, do we really have common approaches? Do we really have common strategies and coordinations? And it turns out that actually not. We can talk about just separate countries in the whole Europe, like Finland, who has this strategy. And maybe you could say that I'm emotional now, and it's just, like some kind of my own conclusions, but actually we did recently a research which is covering currently Latvia, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, and we will, in the next couple of months, also release the research part of Estonia and Lithuania. And it really shows the same situation everywhere. Most of activities actually are donor-sponsored and not government. Okay, governments are mostly working with youngsters and school kids, but maybe not as audiences as a whole. And actually, this is very important, and this is how we come back also to Ukraine, that especially all these vulnerable groups are left outside, actually. And when it comes to Baltics, we can see that those senior audiences and minority audiences, they've been left out. And for example, recent research shows that only 20% of Russian language speaking people in Latvia are supporting Ukraine. Of course, there are lots of undecided who don't know on which side to be, but you can see that this Russian propaganda is still spreading also even in our countries, and it is a big issue. Do we have those common approaches? Because it's very easy to sit in this conference and talk. We need media information literacy. Media information literacy is important, but what do we really do?
Exactly. That's a very big question. And I have maybe one more question to you, because Mayor of Gdańsk, Alexandra Dulkiewicz, was a rapporteur on the opinion on the Democracy Action Plan last year for the European Committee of Region. And we were trying to put I was helping her with this. We were trying to put there like the ideas for making like a specific way of approach of the media literacy as well and education on the EU level. And we actually were looking very much on the Finnish system. Maybe do you have the idea of how to actually put it, and if that would be working in your idea and in work that you do? Do you believe that the Finnish system would be a good way to approach from the European Commission perspective and make the...
I would agree. Of course, we are all looking at Finnish system as an ideal one, but I think especially when it comes to education and working with educators, because this is also sometimes very important. We think only about students and school kids, but working with educators. But also I think what is very important also including media in this, and it's not only about having quality media and so on, but really sometimes what do we see is that media have to explain actually what do they do, because this is something, for example, the same, why do I have to pay, you know? Or when we go to audiences with our meal activities, we always have this question, we will know the answer. We ask, is Facebook media? And it's like 80% of people will say it is media. So it's also more like really this inclusion also of media aspect in this.
Thank you very much. I will now go to Liv. I think I'm going to first ask the people that are in here, and then we'll go to Elias. So Liv, please, can you give us the Danish and Nordic perspective on the issue? I know you have quite a lot of things to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to share a personal experience, a warning, and 2 recommendations. First, the experience. Fake news, propaganda disinformation, misinformation is not a new thing. I've experienced it all my life. It's always been around, and it needs to be addressed and handled. Unfortunately, most efforts to fight fakes have led to censorship. I grew up in the West during the Cold War era. The fear of a world war, including nuclear weapons, were imminent day by day my entire childhood. In the school, I heard about the Russians and the Poles, for that matter, as madmen with a bump, day by day, all my childhood. On my shortwave radio, I could listen to Radio Moscow and Radio Poland, broadcasting in my own language. Pure propaganda. My first Russian word I learned was the word pravda. My school teachers told me that it meant truth, but also that it was the name or the title of the Soviet daily newspaper, which brought anything except the truth. I got curious, and a friend told me that the Danish Communist Party, which was legal and still is, the Danish Communist Party had like a translated version of Pravda in Danish. And I got curious, and I went to the library and asked for that newspaper. They shouted at me, "This so-called newspaper is communist propaganda. No one should read that. It should be banned." The message had the opposite effect on me. The curious young me was affected by the fact that the library deprived me the right to even seeing the communist propaganda newspaper. It made it even more interesting and attractive to me. So, of course, I ended up subscribing to the communist newspaper and had it delivered to my home address despite the warnings from the postman. Later, I even decided to learn Russian in order to be able to read Pravda someday. I was not, and I never became a communist. I was just curious, and I got provoked by the denial of access to the unwanted newspaper. Seen from now, looking back, with no doubt in my mind, I definitely prefer having had access to propaganda, having had access to even the worst propaganda newspapers, rather than being prevented by librarians, school teachers, or politicians. Because I saw what propaganda is like, and I learned to distinguish between propaganda and information. I became media literate. And this leads me to the warning and my two recommendations. The warning is this: don't fight fakes and propaganda by banning unwanted information. In the mouth of leaders like Donald Trump, fake news means unwanted news. It leads to censorship and makes the banned information even more attractive. I strongly oppose to the EU decision to block Russian propaganda, and I'm proud that the Danish Newspaper Association has protested against the blocking and insisted in quoting Russia Today and Sputnik to show the true face of propaganda. Now to my two recommendations. First,
Liv, can I maybe ask you a question first, and
You're
then
welcome.
you'll go with the
Sure.
recommendations? So we better understand that, like, you are basically advocating to allow that Russian propaganda is still there, even though they are having much bigger impact in terms of getting to people through the social media and so on and so forth. What would be your response? Because then I understand we agree that that's changing the attitudes of people, right? The propaganda that is out there, people that are not aware and they are not media literate, as we see that's a problem everywhere pretty much, right? We are not used to get the informations, we're getting too many of them, we are not fact-checking them. Anna has said that, right? We are not used to them. And right now you're saying that that leads to the censorship. So what would be your idea for actually making sure that we will not have in few months or few years, and they are working on their motions, so perhaps even in few days, a big group of pro-Russians in different countries?
This is actually my two recommendations.
Okay, very good.
The first one being, instead of fighting and banning unwanted news, we shall provide and promote quality journalism. I'm happy to hear that Patrick Pennings just advocated for that, promotion of quality journalism. If there is a sufficient amount of clean water in the pool, a few drops of polluted water won't kill us. Censorship is worse. That's the first recommendation. Instead of fighting fakes, running the risk of censorship, promote quality journalism, bring more clean water into the news pools. And that should be followed by recommendation number 2, which is educating and empowering the public from school age and up to distinguish between facts and fakes. This is where media literacy comes into the picture. We should help ourselves and our kids and the citizens and the public to distinguish, to be able to distinguish, like I learned by reading propaganda versus professional journalism during my childhood. We should learn ourselves and our fellow publics to distinguish between facts and fakes, between news and views, between rumors and realities, between journalism and junk. This is where media literacy comes into the picture, and I had the pleasure to work with Anna and to work with Gunther on media literacy campaigns in Russia and in the Baltic region. I should have conducted a journalism exchange course with Anna next week. We are banned from that. 10, 20 Nordic journalists should meet their Russian colleagues. Unfortunately, we are banned from that. And I should have conducted a media campaign, a media literacy campaign in Russia in May. Unfortunately, we can't do that now, and unfortunately, it was my government before the Russian government who stopped us and refrained us from doing it, unfortunately. So, the two recommendations, the warning is against censorship, and the two recommendations are promoting quality journalism and promoting media literacy. If we have access to quality journalism and not just propaganda, and we are media literate, we won't die from a few drops of false news either.
Thank you. Thank you for the amazing work that you're doing as well, and I think that's super important, strategic, long-term strategized as well, in order to make sure that as the societies, we are able to prevail to the fake news and the disinformation. And do you have a call for like instant action? Because the one thing is that's something that will take a bit longer, right? That's something that we still kind of need to vaccine the society, right, for, and it takes time. And at the same time, we are at the state of war here and now, and part of the war strategy of Russia is spreading disinformation in order to destabilize and polarize society. So, and I agree with the most what you're saying, like the truth and positive and information that are actually affecting on the site is important as well. But we also see at the same time that Russia has better strategy in order to reach people, right, than unfortunately still media has. So do you have any like specific point on this as well?
Immediate action. Open all communication lines, open for traveling between the Nordic countries or Europe and Russia, for cooperation with the civil society, not with the state. That's okay, it's part of the sanctions. But we are taking the civil society, including the dissidents, the free press, kind of free press in Russia, as hostages. So open all communication lines and revitalize cooperation on professional journalism and media literacy between East and West. And from this conference, send a message to the daring journalists in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, supporting them, making their job visible.
Perfect.
Embrace them, they need it.
And perhaps doing some Russian-speaking media as well in order to get to different places.
It's already there.
Very good.
And we criticize Russia if they ban it, but we ban theirs and give them the key to how to do.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Urshka, I would like to give the floor to you because we're going to have now more legal perspective on the side.
Well, we are going to have human rights perspective. In fact, I come from the Council of Europe, which is a human rights organization, so also I'll approach the topic from this perspective, the angle of human rights. And I will say that everything that the other panelists and yourself have been speaking about is actually embedded also in international human rights frameworks. So if media literacy is to empower people, all of us, to think critically, and as Liv said, that's not the same thing as thinking correctly, it's in fact helping us to effectively exercise our right to information. That's what it's doing. It's helping us to make informed and autonomous choices about our lives, and that includes also electoral choices, for example. So that's perhaps lies a little bit of an answer to what you were initially asking, but it is a very long-term effort. This is not something that happens overnight, and as Liv was demonstrating through his experience, personal experience, it is something that one has to walk his or her own way. So the right to information, obviously a part of, inherent part of freedom of expression and media freedom. On the one hand, because this is a media conference, we have got the right and duty of the media to impart information and ideas in public interest, on all matters in public interest. But of course, there is a commensurate kind of a corresponding right of the public to receive such information. I think this user perspective, the perspective of us, the public, how we receive information, what that means, and what are also protection mechanisms for it, has in the past not been given enough attention. Although we've heard here what media literacy actually can do, it can help fight disinformation, it's vital for regaining trust in the media and democratic institutions, and it supports the demand for quality journalism. That's also what it does. You don't have the demand, then what's the point of producing it, and who is going to pay for it as well? So I think, yes, today it is more than ever important for people to be able to distinguish between facts and fakes, propaganda and credible sources. And I think that before disinformation became so rampant, also the need to systematically educate people about their sources of news and information was simply not as critical as it is today. But media literacy is much more than just the ability to recognize types of content, to recognize, fakes from facts, to evaluate critically what we're listening, seeing, reading. So I would mention a few concerns and possible solutions, 3 of them actually, picking up on what the others have said. The first one being that we did a study a few years ago at the Council of Europe how to support quality journalism through media literacy. And we've assessed about 70 projects from across Europe. And what we found was, for example, one thing, that a lot of the projects are aimed at school children. They are in the school curricula, but they are not aimed at adult population. And adults will most likely encounter media education tools only if they actively search for them, they won't be offered to them systematically, which is a problem, of course. So a lot more should be done on that issue of having systematic programs for adults, which, of course, brings us to the second problem, which is money. And there's simply not enough systematic support for media literacy programs. So the Council of Europe, for example, we have found that most of these projects kind of sustain themselves on budgets ranging, not exceeding 50,000 euros, which really is not a lot and can't, it can only go as far. For us, it's really important that it would be the states that also collaborate in media literacy projects, meaning that they provide some sort of institutional frameworks, that they have media literacy in their educational, but also media and communication frameworks, and that they provide some funding for it. And the third issue, of course, is what media can do to further media literacy a lot. And they are doing it, but again, we encounter the problem of sustainable funding. Public service media and community media especially, I mean, they have the mandate, you know, they have the reach to the right kind of public. They do a lot of projects, but of course they should be more systematically supported.
Oscar, thank you so much. I was having like the questions coming into my head and you were immediately responding to them. So it's perfect. I maybe have just a small little question. Like, do you believe that making sure that the media are giving conscious information as well is a part of the media literacy? Because there's like quite a lot of clickbites and emotions in the system, and I mean, probably it's hard to change, but do you see any possibility or solution for this, that they are aware that they are as well changing the behaviors of people and they are super responsible for this?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, one big part of the quality journalism recommendation that Patrick has just mentioned before, and I will also promote it because I think, first of all, it is a needed, much needed text, perhaps now more than ever, and secondly, it provides a lot of very good guidelines. Guidelines on sustainability for all of these stakeholders, also states what they can do, but also guidelines on ethics. And they were, this is not, you know, completely top-down approach. We work in multi-stakeholder environment, so this came from journalist community themselves. Also EFJ were involved when we were working on this. And there is a lot about how important it is to embed, for example, fact-checking in the process, to be open about the editorial processes of the media themselves, because that's the way to educate people, etc., etc. This always helps against clickbaits. But I would add one thing, probably. The media sector is simply impoverished at the moment. So there is one guideline there in that recommendation which I think could help solve things a little bit. I mean, you know, there is no panacea, not one solution is going to change everything. But right now, online platforms are actually monetizing most of the media content. They should give back.
Perfect, thank you so much. Yeah, there are clubs definitely for this. So now I will go to Elias, last but not least, joining us from Athens. The floor is yours.
Welcome to Athens virtually, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in this. Great comments, and I would like to take some minutes with some slides because I think they build in terms of forward action and a broader context, but within which, based on what I've been listening, I'd like to suggest to begin with a couple, 2 or 3 action items, Maya. And of course, I thank you also and Mugens for the opportunity to join, and the Gdansk organizers. First of all, I think it should be pursued maybe at the United Nations plenary and in other contexts, some action initiative to make killing or attacking even journalists crimes against humanity, because it's not just individuals being affected. If it is, as it is, the fourth power and the pillar of democracy and society, it is very serious, and it should be so understood and qualified. Secondly, if it is a matter of sustainability. And in November 2020, I wrote about how democracy and the environment should be considered endangered species, prophetically, unfortunately. But the point is, we need to engage in all sectors that I will talk about next to develop an initiative that would have serious amounts of funding. And it would be funding that would not be controlled in some way or other. It would be some sort of independent foundation. I would call this a sustained democracy initiative. And the core of this would be funding journalism, funding literacy, funding quality journalism, and engaging people in all ways and means, as well as, and that should also be a priority, funding, supporting, and to the extent possible, protecting and certainly engaging with civil society in places where democracy doesn't exist or it is being challenged. So I fully echo and agree, for instance, Leif's warnings and recommendations and the other comments by the others. Let me just go into this set of slides briefly in terms of, where are you going democracy, quo vadis democracy? And this is about the long term, but there is also some short term actions that involve and relate to the displaced people we're dealing with. And first of all, there is this observation that this is indeed not recent and it is recurring. The challenge of how democracy can be safeguarded, but also be made safe for the world, because there are issues there that we need to understand better and perhaps manage more wisely. That is not to say to muffle democracy or to constrain it, quite the opposite. But I think it's about the future and sustained peace, prosperity, and security of all of us, the world. This is what we're dealing with globally: network ubiquity, open standards, new business designs, which means that we're dealing with all of the things that were mentioned in terms of the changes. I wrote at the bottom here, meta transformations. The idea is that indeed we have private entities really being major players now in the at least social media space. We should figure ways to coexist, and this is coming to my next, the frameworks I'll talk about. A brief quote on Einstein: we should remember that imagination is very important. We should not be either tamed by reality and currency of events that are very tragic, and also not be discouraged. So technology could play a big role in terms of helping us move towards some sort of abundance that is at least partly artificial, but also sustainable and equitable. And this is very important. This is a theme here. And how you do that is you need to think in, as the previous speaker mentioned, multi-stakeholder ways, and engage means in this matter. And this is, first of all, looking and understanding that people, culture, and technology is a complex dynamic process involving, in any context, including in journalism, as we're discussing here, issues and factors and drivers of change for either direction, better or worse. The outreach factor, whether across nations or even within societies, within groups, and this is where journalism also can play a very important role, be a very significant enabling, bridging device, if you wish. Science, cultural, and innovation diplomacy. Instead of shutting down, I certainly find appropriate, but also a little bit hypocritical, the delayed action against the oligarchs. But I really regret, firing sopranos and orchestra masters and others, or attacking individuals. We should not demonize any one people. We should include and involve them. And we should also, of course, protect our values and our systems. And this is the cyber aspect of this. I'm going very quickly over things that are due to time limitation, but this we need to think in terms of cyber defense, development, and democracy within this context. And at the core of it is journalism. And I'd like us to envision this and think about that. And then in this manner, also diplomacy cyber diplomacy is a very important aspect. Now, and I'll talk next about the quadruple and quintuple helix, a couple minutes more. The digital revolution and this approach, which is multi-stakeholder, inclusive, top-down and bottom-up, is the way to perhaps figure out how to not just to convert the challenge into an opportunity in terms of the displaced people. There's also internally displaced people. There was an allusion to that earlier, and there is very important roles that journalism, again, quality journalism can play in identifying the issues and bridging and providing opportunities and resolutions of the conflicts. Now, there is, of course, the externally displaced people. I talk about social, economic, and political refugees, and we're using these frameworks I've briefly mentioned. I briefly mentioned in our research for some time now, more than 15 years, the EU has been adopting them more broadly. The idea is that we use the biological analog of the DNA helix to identify the major pillars of developed democracies, and this is the bigger context, by the way, developed democracies versus emerging autocracies. It's not just Russia, we should be aware of. And it's not just, and this is a multi-player game, multi-level and multi-stage we're dealing with. And in a way, and I don't want this to be misunderstood, I miss the Cold War because it was simpler, more structured, and for all its fears, as Leif mentioned, and risks, real risks. It was more predictable to some extent. The MAD, mutually assured destruction, is not necessarily so prevalent right now. Anyway, I will be happy to come back to this. The quintuple helix is the bigger context within which the quadruple helix, government, university, industry, and civil society strands of the helix, the quadruple helix fall. Obviously, we're all within the environment. So we need to think of and talk about both democratic and environmental sustainability issues. Journalism is very important. And I'm closing with a brief review of where we are from a technological paradigm point of view. Of course, digital transformation and Industry 4.0 are very important. But now we have, and the EU at the beginning of 2021 talked about, published a report. We've been writing about Industry and Society 5.0 for some time. And the idea is to reach and maintain and pursue a balance between technocentric and human-centric. And I'm just quickly showing these things. So the idea is that we need to understand how to serve the individual, serve our citizens, and this is where journalism falls into play and place, while engaging and leveraging whatever institutions and resources we have. So literacy and quality of journalism, media literacy and quality of journalism are very important aspects of this. But at the same time, we need to have a bigger perspective, and we need to make sure that people have hope, not fear, as much as possible for the future. And I talk about, I close with this, President Roosevelt. I started talking about President Wilson. President Roosevelt talked about the 4 fears. Starting his administration and fighting at the time the Great Recession. He couldn't, well, the war hadn't broken out yet. And he talked about the 4 fears, including
Elias,
the fear of fear.
Thank you very much. We need to finish.
Thank
and I would
you,
like to
I finished.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
giving
Maya.
this comprehensive analysis. And I think it's really important to understand that media literacy is just part of the problem, and that we need to look at it as the big picture and see how everything is connected. So I think that you really put it well.
And not afraid.
We have 10 minutes, and I would love to give the floor to the audience. So if there are any questions, please raise your hand. Yeah. If there is a person with the mic, or anyone, you have it. Just waiting a bit, but yeah. You are a journalist in here. We want to hear what are your questions as well.
I do like what Mr. Longsman said. I also have serious doubts about censorship in a way that, let's say, Russia Today and other channels of TV are being just switched off. In my hotel in the morning, I still found them. But instead of them, there were Ukrainian TV channels, which I would also like to see, of course. It's not the problem that I don't like. But I think that unless there is a situation like in Baltic countries, where you have Russian-speaking population very strong, and you had this opinion polls which find that people are supporting, in fact, what Russians are doing, because these people are watching only these channels. It is not the case in Western countries, neither in Poland, by the way. So I think that we should watch this propaganda, and this I would go one step more, fight it. What I mean, in Polish internet, you can find a number of places where people are exposing voluntarily, without any support, what is the propaganda, Russian propaganda, but as well propaganda of Polish state TV, because it is very heavy even now during the war in Ukraine. So I think that those volunteers should be, in a way, hired by NGOs, and this kind of demystification of propaganda and exposing the propaganda, whatever it is, local or Russian now, should be going on, because only by exposing what it really means, we can fight it. If we ban it, that's not the way, because there are always ways to find this information, and not fighting this is making it credible. That's what I think.
Liv,
And
would you
thank
like to
for your position.
reply to this, or?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, okay. Is there any, yeah, there are more questions, so we can take them all and.
We had discussion with colleagues yesterday during coffee break about banning Russian channels. I myself, I come from Baltic countries. I'm a Director General of Lithuanian Public Broadcaster. I fully support banning Sputnik and Russia Today, and I think that it should have done way before. And unlike a colleague from Denmark, I don't presume that the majority of media consumers are so smart and so critically thinking. But this is my opinion. I wanted to ask Russian colleague, what do you think about this, this ban? Should they be banned or not? What is your opinion?
Let's maybe, if there's one more question, we can take it and then we're going to reply.
Hi, dear panelists. I wanted to ask you, Gunta mentioned that there are parts in the ecosystem, or as a colleague also mentioned, the involvement of universities, industry, government, citizens. Gunta, you mentioned something was missing, and maybe for each of you in your around the Baltic Sea region, for Baltics it's one case, maybe on the other side in Sweden and Nordics it's a different aspect, but what is the key factor that's missing? Is it this coordination of actually bringing together, or is it something else?
Perfect, thank you. Who would like to reply first? I think that we have 3 questions, very directed.
Yeah, I think in a democracy, arguments shall be met with counter-arguments, not with banning arguments. And the same goes for media. Propaganda and fake news should be met with counter-propaganda and counter-fake news rather than banning. As for the Baltic case, as I've followed it, I think the public service media should have, from 1991, served the Russian-speaking population with professional quality news in their language. Then they wouldn't have turned to the worse alternative from Russia. Only years after, when you experienced that they tended to listen to news and watch news in their mother tongue, you inaugurated Estonian services in the Russian language. I think it should be prevented by counter-arguments rather than by banning.
Thank you. Anna? Yeah, Anna. Yeah, we're going one by one.
Thank you for the question, but I wish I had an answer to it. I mean, these 2 channels, they started differently. They started from the very beginning. Sputnik has started, first it was not in Russia, it was broadcasted only abroad, and it started with only positive, great news, something very good happening in Russia, but the audience was not buying it. Then they changed a little and they started to criticize the US and what they are doing. And that reached the audience because there are many people in the world who are a bit irritated by the US, so they found their own niche. And then they changed again, and now it's a very strong propaganda channel. Russia Today, if you compare Russia Today in Russia and Russia Today abroad, there are 2 different channels, and they are broadcasting absolutely different things. In Russia, when they are in Russia, they say that we should get the vaccine, for example. We should get the Sputnik because, well, there was a hesitation in the society if the vaccine is good enough. When they broadcast it abroad, they were anti-vaccine completely, and they were asking people not to, to wait and to see what's going on. I admire the attitude of my foreign colleagues that they debate if they should leave and let this propaganda work in their countries. That's a higher level of professionalism than we have, I have in Russia. In Russia, there is so little space for quality journalism, and a lot of space is occupied by propagandistic channels that I would definitely say I would fight with that. But I can respect the attitude of the Western colleagues.
I can respect it as well, but I very much believe that it's the good thing to do, and it should have been done years ago. And the EU Stratcom is doing an amazing job on this as well. And fact-checking, because I also would like to reply to this, fact-checking is not enough, and we need to always also remember that very often fact-checking is bringing those disinformation narrative to the further public. Günther.
Yes, I just want to add on this propaganda channel closure. We should remember that we are in the war now. And yes, it's very nice to have different sources of information and have to approaching all the propaganda channels and have possibility to value and so on. But please remember we are in the war. And yesterday there was this funny story. A Western colleague over the glass of the wine was like looking at all us from Baltics and said, I think you will be next. And it was like joke from him, but it's not joke for us. And it's not only about ourselves being prepared for really going through like very concrete preparations in case of Russia comes to Baltics, but it's also remembering that it is a war situation now, and you cannot talk only about, like having quality journalism. Yes, we are working on this, having media and information literacy. Russia is waging not only military actions now in Ukraine, it's waging a very, very harsh propaganda war. And so we should remember about this, not just like talking all those nice things about being able to access all the possible propaganda channels. So please remember this. And if we talk about the other question which was asked, then I would say, yes, this is something we need, this common strategy. And then of course, I agree with Leif that maybe if there was some kind of common strategy 10 or 20 years ago, we wouldn't have such kind of situation as now in eastern town in Latvia, where people are protesting, putting out Ukrainian flag, But please remember, it's a war situation, and we just can't sit there and talk all those nice words about quality journalism.
Thank you very much. We started a bit later, so I have the last round that I said that we're going to do, and we discussed it about it yesterday. I want to do a call to action. So I give you each like 3 sentences to make a proper call to action, what European Federation journalists can do, what politicians and the public can do in order to help in the situation. And Urška, I will start with you.
Yes, if I may just have one more sentence.
Sure.
We saw just now the value of, facing arguments and counter-arguments for something that is a hotly debated issue in Europe right now. And there were valid arguments from different people coming from different sides of the problem. So this is all good, because I think that in this room it's a lot of media literate people, but yes, indeed, there will be some restrictions which will also be permissible. Coming again from human rights organization, restrictions can be permissible, but
and we cannot think that all the people are like us, because that's not true.
Exactly, precisely. But the more restrictive that we get, the more robust safeguards we need against any kind of arbitrariness, because this is a slippery slope. Now, coming to possible solutions, I think I have said it before. I personally think that we start with a bit more coordinated approaches and funding. Of course, not every state will use media literacy tools for actually enlightening individuals. That is also something that needs to be, taken into consideration. But because obviously we cannot serve right now to individual positions or situations in individual countries, I would say that overall injecting more resources would be the first thing to do.
Thank you very much. Elias?
Yes, thank you. Real quick, first of all, I mentioned the Sustained Democracy Initiative. At the European level, continental level, there should be, I would say, a multi-billion-dollar initiative funded by multiple, I mentioned the stakeholders, and I put in the chat, by the way, I hope for everybody to see links to related publications on the quadruple and quintuple helix multi-stakeholder initiatives, leveraging technology like crowdfunding and crowdsourcing to figure out ways with immediate democracy, so to speak, to shape this and the actions. Now, if I may, a quick comment on this. It's not just the obvious sources of misinformation that perhaps given the war, at least for a period of time, should be banned. Although in principle, I'm very much opposed for the reasons that Leif described and the others. Now, the point is that there is also other channels that perhaps are owned by oligarchs or are influenced. And I have seen that, where there is a very subtle...
Elias, thank you. I'm sorry, but we still have 3 more speakers, so...
biasing of information, and this also should be of concern. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Leif, please.
Today, we should express our support to our colleague, fellow journalists in Ukraine, in Russia, and in Belarus. Then we should call for opening the all information channels and opening for cooperation across borders from Europe, between European, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Russian journalists. It's a pleasure being here with representatives from all 4 corners of the world.
Thank you very much. Günther?
I would say it's really, if we talk about political level and international organizations, it's really money, and commitment to support quality journalism, to support media information literacy.
Thank you so much. Money. I agree. Anna?
Cooperation. Just we should do our best to keep this small window for cooperation between the professional journalists that we are still having. Because all these sanctions and anti-sanctions, it's just killing this last very, very tiny path we are walking.
Thank you so much. I think that's a big call for the strategic, unified approach and really making it now. Thank you so much. Thank you for the speakers, and thank you for the audience.
And thank you to the moderator. There's a coffee break now, and we are back here at 11. I just want to say to those of you, Leif Lensman just said it, that we want to support free journalism, free and independent journalism in all Europe, including Belarus and Russia. We had the meeting yesterday evening. If there are some of you from Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, and Moldova also represented yesterday evening that want to have a meeting, to have a chance to go on with that discussion, we have a possibility for that. You can just come here and we will try we have the room for you. Thank you. And there's a break and coffee.
panel today and last panel on this conference. And a very important topic, especially in these ugly and dangerous times we live in. My name is Maja Sever. I'm the president of Trade Union of Croatian Journalists. I'm also journalist on Croatian television public service in Croatia, and I will be moderator of this panel today. Media freedom and security of the media and as the precondition for democracy. Very important topic. Our guests today are representatives of organizations addressing media freedom, mapping, and warring challenges. Both the UN and the Council of Europe have called on a number of states with all stakeholders to develop national plans with a mechanism to ensure safety of journalists. We also heard this on this conference today. How to achieve this and really ensure the protection of journalists today? I will talk with Adrian Collin from European Federation of Journalists. Adrian, please join me on the stage. And the second guest is Gulnara Akundova, Head of Global Response International Media Support, please join me. Human rights defender with wide-ranging international advocacy expertise. She has reported on and advocated for sources of journalists and media workers who have been censored, treated, intimidated, imprisoned, attacked, blackmailed, and murdered. Join us, thank you. You can sit, please. And our last guest is Lawrence Hutting, Senator Advisor, European Center for Freedom of Press and Media. Lawrence leads the organization advocacy activities to raise awareness and provide direct responses to threats to media freedom and build on monitoring and analysis. Welcome. And now we can start with our panel. On the first day of war, European Federation of Journalists joined the peace demonstration in Brussels, organized by European Trade Union Confederation. In the following days, European Federation of Journalists joined it and condemnation of the armed aggression against Ukraine with other unions, organizations, and demanded protections of human rights, media freedom, and of course, the journalists who reported from Ukraine. After that, European Federation of Journalists united with International Federation of Journalists, intensively trying to organize concrete assistance for journalists in Ukraine and journalists who reported from the war. Adrian, maybe you can tell us on the beginning of this panel, what is the situation now, what is being done, how we can try to protect and give real protection for journalists who is in Ukraine and who reported from Ukraine or plan to.
Thank you, Maya. Well, I think the first point I would like to make is that, and probably that will be shared, I think, is that we were all caught unprepared regarding this crisis and this invasion. Journalists on the one side rushing to the front line without proper equipment, without insurance, without any plans, local contacts, and just entering into a very dangerous and hostile environment. Most of these journalists also are not trained properly to deal with the situation. And this is also obviously the fact of foreign journalists, but also local journalists. In the past, with IFJ and EFJ, we had trained journalists in hostile environment, specifically in Ukraine, after the Maidan crisis and the Donbass crisis. Obviously, all the journalists that we trained, they have been through basically the aggression and all the threats from the Russian army. But now in Ukraine, most journalists, they were covering any type of subjects in the society, they were not prepared to cover the war. So one of the most important needs that we have identified is that journalists must be trained either online because they cannot move in the country, or also physically, which is something that we are currently looking into. I think the second point as well, which is very important for us, is that employers have not really, if I can say, have not helped enough or supported enough the journalists that they are sending in the field.
There is no security plan, there is no, I know that because I'm also always in contact with the colleagues on the field, and it's a really big problem. So, but you published an article about that and demanding from employers to give this protection.
Yeah, exactly, because we felt and we received so many queries from journalists, from public service media, organization, for very well-known news agencies, photo agencies, about how can we get protective equipment for our journalist. He's in Poland, he's going to cross to Ukraine in 2 hours. How can we get such equipment for him? And I think this is it is a scandal nowadays that media organizations are not protecting the journalists when they go to such type of environment. There is also obviously a lot of media organizations who are commissioning freelancers to go into the field without all those structures in place to ensure the safety and their protection. So that's obviously a very important point that we want to make. The other issue that we are dealing with is obviously our trade unions and our members in the field. We have 2 trade unions in Ukraine, the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine, NUJU, and the Independent Media Trade Union, IMTU, and both had actually to completely reorganize themselves. They had to be relocated as well because they could not operate anymore in Kiev, where their headquarters was based. These organizations have also branches in different regions of Ukraine, and currently they are not able to be in contact with some of their branches, like in Mariupol, for instance. There is no more communication going on, and this is obviously a real concern for the people and the journalists who are located in these areas.
And, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but our colleagues are in real and serious dangers, because we heard yesterday our colleague from Ukraine, there is maybe even a list of journalists and probably also a member of journalist organizations. She told us how dangerous it is to be journalist now in Ukraine.
No, exactly. It was already dangerous, I think, before. Different type of threats that journalists face in the field, and this is something that we have been addressing for many years at the EFJ and at the IFJ. But obviously now the situation has completely changed. We are also facing a conventional war between 2 armies, and journalists are not prepared for such type of conflict. It hasn't been happening for a very long time, and both foreign or local journalists do not know how to behave in such circumstances. So one of the main activities that we have carried is to really identify what are the current needs. Mm-hmm. And we sent an international expert to Lviv 2 weeks ago to discuss with our unions, to discuss with journalists on the ground, international, local journalists, what were the most important needs. Obviously, equipment is the major need at this very moment, and it's very difficult to source, to find this equipment in Europe at the current moment. And we are thankful for UNESCO, who is going to provide us with this support on a very short term. So we will be able to provide 100 protective equipment gear to journalists, and we are going to obviously channel that through our trade unions. Also, what is clear is that we need to organize evacuation of journalists or relocation of journalists who are in the most difficult areas of the country. And this is very important that we can help our unions to structure this work so that journalists are supported in the best way possible. This means, obviously, the security for the evacuation as such, to the safe havens in the West that currently remain. We don't know yet if the situation is going to worsen or if it will stay a safe place. For the moment, we are considering that we can operate in the west of Ukraine, and this is the intention of the EFJ, to be able to provide services and support in the west of Ukraine. The most important is to get the people out of the east and bring them to the west so that we can organize training for them. But we also need simply to care for the living expenses of the journalists, but also of their families, because journalists do not want to leave, obviously, without their loved ones. And so, based on the assessment that we did with our trade union, the optimistic scenario would be that we are looking at 1,000 journalists who would want to be relocated. A medium-term scenario would be looking at 3,000 journalists, and the worst case, if the entire country would be invaded, would be that we are looking at at least 5,000 journalists plus their families, so that's almost 20,000 people who would need to be evacuated. I think at the international level as well, we have been cooperating, trying to organize ourselves, which has not been easy, even though these coalitions do exist. But I would still say that each of us, we are trying to organize ourselves, help the stakeholders that are working with us. And so a more coordinated approach would be much more welcomed.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, that will be the questions also for our other guests. But first, Gulnara, in the later reports to the United Special Rapporteur of the situation of human rights, you warned it how recently global events from the COVID to the election, from United States to Uganda, have developed pressures and impact on disinformation on the global order, peace and security in every day. And then came the war in Ukraine. We know what is a UN action plan, but how to, and we talk about this plan and European plan also on this conference, but how to implement this and those plans at the national levels and in this situation we are now.
Thank you, Maya. Would you mind terribly if I allow myself a couple of comments in relation to what Adrian just said?
Of course.
Well, Adrian, you said that the Ukrainians have not been prepared for that, and that the safety systems have not been in place in order for journalists to continue to operate under the war conditions. Well, if you are being bombed and bombarded, how could you prepare yourself? So what equipment do you need to protect yourself from bombing and airstrikes. And we have seen in Ukraine deliberate targeting of media installations, TV towers, which left dozens of TV and radio stations without broadcast. That is a war crime, and it should be condemned as such. So Russia should be held accountable for those war crimes, because according to international law, journalists are classified, identified as civilians, and deliberate targeting civilians during war is a war crime. So we condemn that, and we stand in solidarity with our Ukrainian colleagues. Well, then there is another point that I wanted to raise, that yes, it is important to have a plan, because we say vision without a plan is just a dream, and it is important to be prepared and to have a plan. The UN plan of action that you have asked me about, Maya, it's a very holistic approach to ensuring safety of journalists, and I emphasize holistic because the plan is very comprehensive, and it's not only about protection of, say, physical safety, but it's more. The plan is structured around the so-called 3 Ps, sometimes we call them 4 Ps, prevention, protection, and prosecution, and increasingly we also talk about partnerships, because partnerships very important for the implementation of the plan, because we talk about a multi-stakeholder approach. So several countries have adopted their national plan for safety of journalists according to the criteria set by the UN Plan of Action for Safety of Journalists. Denmark is now considering this plan. It has lately been adopted in the UK. It means that nowhere journalists are safe anymore. And as you said, Adrian, it's always good to be prepared. You also asked me about disinformation. Yes, we could see an impact of disinformation, especially of weaponized information by the Kremlin on each one of us. I personally was affected by that as well. Just the other day, I lost my uncle, my dear uncle, to the Russian disinformation. This man, I cannot recognize him. He has become fully zombified by the Russian TV stations and the Russian media, by all the propaganda and disinformation, weaponized information that is coming from Moscow. And we are talking about a highly intelligent person who has a PhD. So it's a real threat, and we should take even more measures against this weaponized information. Yes, thank you.
Lawrence, important part of the work of your organization is material support for journalists, a program for journalists in exile, residents, creating a safe place for journalists, and also, according to what Adrian said, what is the current situation in the relation of this war, this conflict, but also the pressure on Belarus and Russian journalists. With EFJ, you already helped to open reception in Kosovo, and what is planning and concrete actions for this part of protection journalists?
Thanks, Maya. So yeah, indeed, with the European Center, we've been running for a number of years now what we call our Journalists in Residence program. It offers a temporary relocation, 3 to 6 months, to journalists whose safety is being threatened. And it's a comprehensive program, so we offer housing, a stipend, access to healthcare, access to psychosocial care, networking opportunities, and so on. Until recently, we hosted about a dozen journalists a year, and most of those were coming from Turkey, and then recently also from Belarus. Now, in response to the war in Ukraine, we've been working to expand that program indeed. On the one hand, we've, with the support of the government of Kosovo and together with the EFJ, we've created 20 additional fellowships for Ukrainian journalists who can relocate temporarily to Kosovo, generally under the same kind of setup as what I described of the existing program. We're also looking to grow the capacity of our program in Leipzig. We've already created 5 additional spots with the support of the Saxon government, both for Ukrainian journalists, but also for independent Russian journalists. I think that's important to stress here as well. And we're looking to create at least 5 additional spots to that, so 10 in total. Of course, considering the numbers that you mentioned, Adrian, this feels and is probably very much a drop of water on a very hot plate. But I think concretely for the people who are getting supported, it is important also if it is only 30 people, right, compared to the big needs there are. And of course, we're looking to expand further and work with partners also to share the expertise and to expand this program further to address this need.
You mentioned also colleagues from Belarus. Together with the Human Rights and Media Freedom Organization, Gunnar, you warned of the escalation of situation in Belarus. It was before war, but we must not forget what's happening in that country. And also, you visited Moldova. Can you tell us about the situation there and the actions of your organizations to helping those journalists and people there?
Well, thank you. Maybe I should start with Belarus. According to Vyazna, a very respectable human rights group in Belarus, there are currently more than 1,000 political prisoners in Belarus, and the figure is growing day by day, so it's very difficult to present statistics. You look up statistics yesterday, but today the figure is bigger. So that's why I say more than 1,000. According to BASH, again, I checked statistics 2 days ago. It might have been different now. There are 30 journalists behind, media workers behind bars in Belarus as we speak. Also, according to the latest report by UN Human Rights Council, there is very appalling situation in relation to political prisoners and those who are in detention. In Belarus, cases of gender-based violence against all genders, men, women, and other genders have been registered. And this is incredibly outrageous, and it's like difficult for me to cite the report because it's enormous torture that people go through in detention, and that also includes rape. So as all eyes are on Ukraine and as we stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people, we should not forget about Belarus and other countries. I also hear from my dear Ukrainian friends and colleagues that it is important that we keep our eye on the region, because only together in solidarity we can stand against the regime in Russia. And just, I give you one example that it's just a couple of days ago we had a meeting with the Ukrainians, and then they urged us. They said, when it comes to disinformation, look at the region. Look at Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, Moldova, Belarus. There we need to support efforts against the Russian disinformation, because it is there when Russia is using weaponized information in order to achieve their political and military aims. So we should be very mindful of that, and that is a strategy of my organization, also International Media Support, that we work across the region, where we also try to build links to the Baltic states, Poland and Western Balkans, because there are lots of common challenges, but the solutions could also be common.
And how? Like a workshop with the colleagues? this strategy? How you will have some workshop with journalists and organization? What is the plan, concrete plan?
Well, I think, for example, when we look at Ukraine, arguably, Ukraine has a very good structure in place, national structure, against the Russian disinformation. There is an excellent cooperation between state agencies, civil society, fact-checkers, and media in relation to fighting disinformation. We have like two fact-checkers in Ukraine, Stop Fake and Vox Ukraine, who are Facebook accredited. It means that they are a member of Pointers Institute International Fact-Checking Network. So there is a lot of experience that they could share with similar organizations in the region. So we should all learn from the Ukrainians how to address the Russian disinformation. Another example in Moldova, because you've mentioned Moldova. We have Cornelia here, who is the director of Center for Investigative Journalism in Moldova. And then they have done an investigation, like a professional journalistic investigation into who is behind the Russian disinformation in Moldova. We should not forget about the role of mainstream media, traditional, hardcore journalism when it comes to addressing disinformation, because journalists, they could dig deeper and find out who are behind the disinformation messages and disinformation. Well, Moldova, I've been to Moldova very recently, and I would say that as a human rights defender, I often stumble upon the wall when it comes to promoting press freedom and fundamental freedoms, because it's like very rare that you can see genuine government will. But Moldova is a beautiful exception. There is a very strong commitment from the government of Moldova to pursue media reforms and to bring the country's legislation in line with the Council of Europe standards, international standards for media freedom and internet governance. And this is very, very admirable. And the country is very open to cooperate with civil society and expert organizations, international media development organizations, towards achieving the reform. Also, Moldova is very unique because the country is to adopt a first ever national action plan for media development. So the draft action plan exists. It is in Romanian language, we have seen it. It is very good already, it is promising. And the action plan has been developed by civil society actors in cooperation with the Parliament of Moldova and the government of Moldova. So it's like very much an interagency action plan where you have so many state actors involved in implementation, but the lead is the Parliamentary Committee on Culture, Media, Education, etc., and they are very committed. So I really commend Moldova, the government of Moldova, for their genuine will for reform.
Okay, thank you. And I'll go back to Ukraine and Adrian. Maybe you can tell us a few words about how does the security fund work, who can get involved and how? Because the security solidarity fund is very, very important at that moment, as you talk about lack of equipment and security.
So one of the first action and first step that we took was indeed to make an appeal for funding to our membership. So to our many members around the world, to help our unions in Ukraine to be able to actually simply respond to the emergency of the situation. Rapidly, together with them, we established, as I said, the needs. And like Lauren said, 30 places here, 20 kits, there, will not actually be enough. So this is why we launch this appeal, and I encourage everyone, obviously, to contribute to the solidarity effort. We are not the only one making solidarity efforts. There are several different initiatives. What I can say is that our main aim will be to really cooperate with our unions. They are our eyes on the ground, they know the situation, and it is essential that we support them. Because themselves, they represent so many journalists in the field who are currently experiencing the worst situation you can imagine. So the fund, we have already sent funds to our Ukrainian unions to organize relocation, to provide micro-grants to journalists who have evacuated the difficult areas so that they can start living, I wouldn't say normally, but just survive through the help of the solidarity of our members, but also individual journalists. And so far, donors as well, some donors have helped us, editors, Society of Editors have also provided funding for that. The main aim now is really, as I said, to organize the response in a more professional way, if I may say, to establish a network of safe houses so that journalists can move to the safe area the best way possible, to be able then to sustain as well their living expenses, for instance, and would they decide, because unfortunately some will decide to leave the country, that we offer them the possibility to go abroad. We have organized together with our Polish Association of Journalists. We have started working together. They have a facility where journalists can be hosted if they require it. But I do think the reality at the moment is that most journalists want to stay inside Ukraine. They want to contribute to the coverage of the war and what is happening for Ukraine. I can say they are very brave. I said they are not prepared. I do not blame them, obviously. This is also a collective response that I think we should all look into it, and especially for the future. Because as it was explained, there are other countries now that may be at risk, and we need to prepare better so that what is happening now doesn't happen again for the future. So I think that's a very important message, that safety, even though it's not an immediate threat, it may come one day, and you should always prepare for the worst and the unexpected. If you get prepared, then you can react in a better way. Mind you, I have to say as well that journalists that were killed in Ukraine recently were very prepared, were very safety conscious, but it didn't prevent them from dying, unfortunately. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done to really create this culture of safety around the region, and we've been working on that for a long time, but also I think in Europe and through the Media Freedom Rapid Response Program, for instance. We are working at the European level as well to raise the safety awareness. There are different risks, obviously, but journalists do get injured. There are many attacks against journalists in Europe as well, and this needs to be addressed.
Yes, and that's the reason we have to continue our activities of our organizations. Yes, of course.
Just very, very quick remark. I agree with you, Adrian, and it's just, if I could only add one thing, we should stop being reactive, but we should be proactive instead. So yes, it is important to relocate a journalist from point A to point B, but it is also essential to think ahead, months ahead, to think about a long-term plan for the media, for the independent media sector in Ukraine. And for this, we need a coordinated, well-thought international effort.
And for other countries, not just for Ukraine. Lawrence, your organization is focused on members and candidates for European Union, and there are two most important trends: attacks on journalists and on the role of journalists by officials, but also by protesters in numerous protests across Europe and other countries. Assess the situation, and what are you doing to protect journalists and reduce those attacks? And of course, another thing is online attack has increased in all countries. How to build protection mechanism quickly and effectively. It's also part of our efforts and tasks.
Yes, so as Adrian mentioned, the challenges are different, but they're not absent. And with the Media Freedom Rapid Response, which is a coalition of 6 media freedom organizations, most of them are here, we undertake systematic monitoring of media freedom violations in the EU and in candidate countries. And there's indeed 2 contexts that appear as being the ones where we register most of those violations. Demonstrations being the first. 28.4% of all alerts we register take place during demonstrations. So we're talking roughly 180 per year. This happens in countries that are leaders when it comes to press freedom in Europe, such as the Netherlands, for instance, and countries that lag behind when it comes, when we're talking about those issues, for example, Greece or Bulgaria and so on, and everyone in between. So it's really like a pan-European phenomenon. It's, in terms of the kinds of violations we see, it's a bit of a split. On the one hand, it's, as you mentioned, attacks coming from protesters. What plays a role here, of course, is increasing polarization in society. That has been sort of supercharged a little bit by the pandemic, but it was present before that, of course. The rise of populism, populist politics, and so on. The second aspect here is the role of the authorities, and the police specifically in this context, or law enforcement, who on the one hand don't always adequately protect journalists who are covering demonstrations. That's one issue. The other one is where they themselves are the source of the violation. Obstructing reporters from accessing the site of a protest, temporarily detaining them, moving them away, and in that sense interfering with their reporting, but also at times proper aggression and violence against journalists by law enforcement officers. So that's in terms of, like in a nutshell, the assessment, I guess. Now, how to address this, right? I think a key for that lies in, or is given by the international standards on this, and the regional standards specifically. There's the Council of Europe recommendation from 2016 about safety of journalists, and then of course also the recent European Commission safety recommendation. And the latter especially has a number of targeted recommendations on how to improve the safety of journalists during protests, and that lies a lot, or turns a lot on improved collaboration between the journalistic community and law enforcement to ensure that, you know, operational procedures are put in place that effectively help to put that protection of journalists in place when the violence is coming from protesters. A good practice example in this regard is the Netherlands, for example, where with Pers Veilig, which is a collaborative protocol discussed between the Prosecutor General, the Journalist Union, and NVJ, the Society of Editors-in-Chief, as well as the police. And they've put in place a protocol with like very concrete measures that can be taken. And also it's an example of like this ongoing dialogue between the profession on the one hand and the authorities on the other. In terms of how to address the polarization of the public that gives rise to these attacks, I think that's a bit outside the scope of what we're talking about today. But media literacy, I think, is one part of the solution there, right? What Liv said in the previous panel of promoting quality journalism and promoting media literacy so that people know what a journalist does and what the value is of a journalist should hopefully, maybe naively, but should hopefully reduce the number of attacks on journalists during protests. When it comes to attacks by law enforcement officers, I think it's important that these are properly followed up on disciplinary proceedings that lead to actual sanctions, if need be, the option to take it to the courts. And to, when a police officer commits violence against a journalist, that can be a criminal act, and where it is, that should be, punished accordingly. So that's the protest bit. Online, indeed, is the second most frequent context where we register alerts. It's around 17%. And here it's a number of different things. A lot of it is harassment, either on social media platforms, but also through email and any kind of electronic means of communication. It often comes from the public, and there again, I think improved media literacy is one element of the solution. There's obviously a role for social media platforms. They need to do better in terms of offering mechanisms that can improve or reduce these kinds of attacks. However, what we also see in a number of countries is that the public is being egged on by politicians, populist politicians usually, who create a really hostile environment and who themselves engage in speech that denigrates and that demeans journalists, and that sort of gives a signal to their followers, to their fan base, to their voters of, this is okay, this is a journalist you can target. And you frequently see that after they sort of signpost, go after this journalist, they then get a torrent of abuse from private actors over them, which isn't properly followed up on. And here again, what should be illegal offline, what is illegal offline should be illegal online. Harassment isn't usually legal offline, so why would it be okay online, right? There is more that can be done also in terms of, like protection through better law enforcement.
Thank you. Now it's time, yes, I see. Now it's time for questions of our audience, and we already have one. Do you have microphone? No? Okay.
Hello, and thank you. I'm a correspondent of Reporters Without Borders in Poland. My name is Dorota Nygren, and I would just like to give you a short information and I guess little appeal to you, all of you, and tell you what we are doing now. As you know, 6 journalists in Ukraine already died, right? What we are concentrating our efforts now is to give bulletproof vests to journalists in Ukraine. And as you know, it is costly business. One bulletproof vest is 1,000 euro. And journalists in Ukraine, they need 4th class of protection. So what we do, we try to collect money and we try to get them to Ukraine. We already managed to get 30 vests to Lviv. Last Saturday, we opened a press center in Lviv. So what we want to do is to collect and to get as much as we can of those bulletproof vests. They need several hundreds of those. What is also important, just yesterday, we have to double check that because this is a fresh information, Polish government allows until May for everyone who want to buy equipment, military equipment to Ukraine, to buy it and to get to Ukraine without license. It is important because it would be much easier for us because these bulletproof vests, you have to have license to buy them and to sell them and to export them as well. So this is a really important information because then we have the window until May. And as for now, we in RSF, we have transportation to Ukraine for those vests from Poland. So what I wanted just to say to all of you, every vest is counted because it is so costly, 1,000 euros. So if you can collect money to provide some vest, even one, then it is important for people in Ukraine because it's happening now. They are just dying. Thank you for that, and I give also the microphone to Irina because she's a trainer for safety for journalists in Ukraine, so she's expert on safety as well.
Hi, my name is Irina Zemlyana, and I just want to mention that you are very informed about what the Ukrainian journalist needs, and I just want to say that in between 2014 to 2016, we provide about 6 or 10 safety trainers. What means is a safety trainers? It's a ground safety trainers on the target ground, 5 or 4 days. So, but you know, according to the international standard, you need to have another training in 3 years. So it's nothing for that situation till now. And on the summertime, we provide 4 trainers, which means it's 200 journalists, 5 trainers was very well trained. But also, from the 8 years, a lot of new generation of journalists is just growing up and they don't have any experience. We need some relocation for journalists, as you told, but the West East Ukraine is absolutely stocked, so it's no place where to live. And also, we need to think what to do with the men journalists, because it's forbidden to them to leave the country, but they also have even more danger than women, because if they will stay, they will also want to take them. And the thing which are we not thinking, it's how it's called? Psychological security, because nobody talking about them, and it will be a huge problem. It's already a huge problem because in that summer trainings which we had, in each training we had somebody with a panic attack in that trainer. Before, we didn't have it at all on our trainings on the last year. So it will be a huge program, and like people say that it's not needed. And yeah, about the bulletproof vest. When the war is starting, we had 5 bulletproof vests, just 5. And then in 4 days, one British journalist just collected money in his Instagram and sent me 1 more. Now we have 121 bulletproof vests, but we have a list of journalists, about more than 400 still needed, and they will need more and more. And also, it's impossible to have insurance for the journalists. And as I told that, we are very thankful for the international media who is coming to Ukraine to show what is happening, but they also using Ukrainian journalists without any responsibility. You know that 24 journalists, Alexandra was dying, and she was a fixer for the Fox News without any legal
protection
issues.
Yeah.
They even don't recognize her as a fixer, but she was killed as a member of their team. So please, international media outlets, don't use our Ukrainian journalists us like
yes, and respect
material.
them
So
as a part
I
of
just
team.
want
Yeah.
to ask you, and also I want to thank you for all people of journalists, all journalist associations for helping us because it's extremely important for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I will ask you to comment. We heard a lot of things, and I agree that we have to respect colleagues from Ukraine as a part of international team. Colleagues talks about need for bulletproof vests, about psychological help, about danger in which male colleagues are because they are unable to go out from Ukraine. So please, if you can comment on this.
Yes, thank you very much, dear RSF colleagues, for your intervention. I just maybe want to warn, I know that RSF is aware about that, and I know that there is coordination going on in relation to the purchase of PPE also among IMS, RSF, and other like-minded organizations. But for those who do not know, I think it's very important to highlight that there is a lot of suspicious low-quality PPE circulating in the black market. So when we purchase PPE, we should make sure that they are up to the standard. So for example, in our organization, we have a safety person who is responsible to quality assure any purchase before we send anything to Ukraine. Yeah, thank you.
Adrian, okay, maybe.
And I think as well, because there is such a shortage of equipment, people are now also looking for military equipment. And when we talk about journalists, it should be very clear that journalists should not wear military gear because that puts them much more at risk. And so this is an important reminder. And we also ensure the quality of these vests. We had several options that came up, but decided this is not the right solution at the moment. We prefer to, get the civilian vests. And so, yeah, equipment is a big issue. Psychological support is another very important issue that will probably come even later. Myself, when I was also working in safety for the International Federation of Journalists, we had also journalists breaking down during training because these training remind them of the realities that they have been facing. We give them skills so that they can deal or react better about the different type of threats that they face. But it's true that the psychological trauma is something where I would say the media development community is probably investing less at this stage than in the safety traditional training. I remember when we worked on a project in Ukraine, we did organize with psychologists from Ukraine focus groups where journalists who covered the demonstration could talk together. It was very useful for them. Unfortunately, again, this might not be always the priority, but we need to keep that clearly in mind for the future.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, just to wholeheartedly and fully support the point you made on the role of the fixer and the fact that they're not visible enough. It's, of course, a long-standing issue. And I think all journalists know that a good local fixer is worth their weight in gold, really. It's not okay that they remain so invisible. And let's hope that this sad death could be a call to action for outlets and for foreign correspondents to improve that and to give more recognition to the role of the local journalists and local fixers with whom they work.
Okay, is there any other question? Okay, no? Okay, but before the end of this panel, I think that it's very important to say a few words, and that it will be a question for you, Lawrence, because one of the most important parts of your work is working on the cases of Daphne Caruana Galizia, Jan Kuciak, George Kafkas, and Peter De Vries. Is there any shift in the process against their killers? And I think it's very important also on this conference to say a few words about colleagues.
Yeah, I agree. The numbers here are thankfully nowhere near as, impressive, between some very big air quotes, as the ones for protest, for example. But I'm really afraid, and also as an organization, we're really afraid of the potential of a creeping climate of impunity, also in Western Europe, when it comes to murders of journalists. All of the cases you named, in none of them there's been full justice and accountability, which means the perpetrators, the middlemen, the masterminds behind these assassinations, all held to account in a criminal court. In addition, also a full investigation of the circumstances that give rise to these murders and where the shortcomings are from the state, from the authorities, and so on. Plus also doing justice to the work of these journalists, right? I think since the death of Daphne Caruana Galizia, her family and the foundation have been very active in continuing to publish and to push and to further advance the investigations that she was working on. And I think that's also a really important aspect and should be part of this holistic idea of justice for these assassinated journalists. Like, we need to honor their work, and we need to put a spotlight on the work they did. And that's precisely also why it matters, right? Each of these people was working on very serious issues that are in the public interest of everyone. It's about corruption, it's about the way that organized crime pervades society and undermines our democracies and our rule of law. And it's really sad that people have to die when they want to expose this for the greater good and for the benefit of us all, really. So yeah, you're quite right. It's definitely an issue that deserves a spotlight also here today.
Yes, okay, yes, of course. I think that you also want to say a few words. Gulnar?
Yes, maybe not a few words, it's more like a plea. Okay. I would like to remind that even at the time of war and when we face extreme situation, we should not forget about the gendered perspective. We should not forget about the needs of all genders. Wherever we do, we should think about women, we should think about LGBT, whether their needs have been taken into consideration. So that's my plea to everyone. Thank you.
Adrian, do you want to say a few words on the end of our panel?
No, I think it's time to wake up as well in Europe about the safety of journalists. Like Gulnara explained, we need now, I think, a long-term approach to the situation and how we can address the problems of the safety of journalists. I think I've been myself in this field for many years. We keep on repeating the same things, and we are still not prepared for what's coming up. And it needs a coordinated approach, like what Gulnara said. And it's essential that all organizations that do help and defend journalists stick together and start thinking about how we can really adapt ourselves, prepare ourselves, so that we can immediately respond. Here again, it took us several days, when the invasion started, to actually grasp how we would start responding to the crisis. We know the capabilities of the different powers. Is there a risk? If there is the risk, we need to prepare. There are some countries already who are fearing or who are preparing. And we need to be, as an international organization supporting the media, we need to be there as well to contribute to this preparedness.
Thank you very much. And in the end, we can only say that it's terrible to live in times when we have to try to protect the lives of our colleagues, to provide protections like helmets and bulletproof vests. Unfortunately, our colleagues have already lost their lives reporting from the war in Ukraine. Resting in peace. Working together, and it makes us stronger. I think that this conference also showed that we will continue to fight to protect journalism and journalists, because protection of journalists and protection of journalism is protection of democracy. And thank you very much. I think that Mogens will, I hope that Mogens will say something on the end.
Thanks a lot for Maya for moderating this very important last panel. And thanks to all of the panels, thanks to all of the speakers, thanks to all of you who have been here yesterday and today to contribute in these very critical times where we need critical journalism, where we need all our what we can do as journalists and media in Europe to promote free media, to promote free journalism. It has never, as far as I can remember, been so important as it is now. We have tried here at the very end, so I've been a bit working on a text. So if you have just 2-3 minutes patience, I will put a text on the screen. So if you please could do that. I just got the last version now, so I will send it to you. I will put it up here. 3 minutes, please. Okay? Good. Thank you. So just try.
As there are 3 minutes left, and there is usually one thing we forget in the end of congresses like this, there has been a terrible amount of work to have a congress like this. And usually we forget to thank them, those who prepared, like Jens or Mogens and all the others. And I would like to express my gratitude for them that they did that work. Mogens, you may take home those flowers. That's all that's left.
Thank you very much. I just think we cannot leave each other here without sending a message from us. And as soon as it's on the screen, I hope you will read it and you will agree. I agree on it. It's not that we are going to vote or do something like that. And there might be a few corrections after we have met here today. But just so we have the spirit of it. And it's, of course, related very much to the current situation. It will not be a statement for the full 2-day 2 days conference that we have had here. We have had many topics, but simply trying to focus on what is on the very important issue that we have touched upon at nearly each session. Here we got it. Yes, of course, I will read it. Representatives for European journalists and media at the Free European Media Conference in Gdansk, 17-18 March 2022. The appalling war against Ukraine is not only destroying the life of millions of people, but has also weaponized news and information with propaganda, disinformation, lies, and censorship. We have to find out the exact number. It was mentioned 6 today. 6 journalists have been killed in Ukraine while reporting from the war. Dozens of journalists have been wounded, captured, or have disappeared. Ukrainian journalists face mortal danger on a daily basis. A pluralistic and vibrant media landscape in Ukraine is threatened with extinction. Independent Russian journalists cannot anymore do their job without risk to be punished and jailed. Belarusian journalists can only work in exile. Journalists and media in Moldova and Georgia are under pressure and in a vulnerable situation. The truth is the first victim in a war, and it is currently threatened by disinformation and censorship. Ukraine is the victim of the armed invasion, but we are all victims of the information war. Democracies relies on free information, free journalism, and free media. Independent journalists across borders share common values. We have the number of journalists and countries here, including Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, gathered at the Gdansk conference, Free European Media 2022, express their support of press freedom free from restrictions, censorship, punishment, and imprisonment. We strongly urge all European governments to respect, protect, and support independent journalism across borders, including in the countries of war and conflict, and call for actions to enable Ukrainian journalists to continue to do their work under the necessary safety conditions, to maintain and strengthen the assistance to Belarusian journalists, to support independent journalists in Russia through fellowship and professional training at European educational institutions, to provide emergency of humanitarian visas to threatened Russian and Belarusian journalists and their relatives, to open bank accounts for the journalists, to foster professional and union cooperation with journalists in the region, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, Poland. I'm not sure how many countries we're going to mention here. This is the spirit. There might be something that we just need to correct. Is this something that we could, in the spirit of this, could end our conference with? So if you agree on this, please. Thank you very much. Then we will, as organizer, finalize it, correct it, and we will send it out. And you will get it, of course, all of you who have participated here yesterday and today. So finally, it's to say thanks a lot. I hope there will be some coffee or something outside, and safe trip home. And take care of our journalism. Take care of the information to all our citizens, and stay on our values and stay together. Thank you.